What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming back at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's get right into it. First story is from Andy Jassy and Amazon announcing that Project Kuiper, which is essentially a Starlink competitor from Amazon, has launched their first 27 production satellites and operating in low Earth orbit. I don't use any of the satellite internet yet, so I can't really speak to it, but it is interesting, like how on planes you can get really high download speeds, so cool to see how this will evolve. Next is we have Stephen Tay from Dub with a really cool anecdote about how Omegle, which was a peer-to-peer video chat app, had 27 million daily active users running on a single LINODE 2880 server. I'm not sure exactly what kind of server that is, but just from some quick research, it seemed to be $40 a month, so that's really cool. Personally as well, for one of my projects, I just moved it over to a VPS, and there is a lot of benefits to it. The ability to move, there's no vendor lock, so we'll see where the industry heads. I really am still a fan of Vercel, but also I'm just a fan of Docker and making things able to be deployed anywhere, as opposed to having these like specific vendor locked JSON files or config or whatever. Next, we have TK Dodo with a new blog post about optimistic updates in React Query. He has like a 30-part series just breaking down React Query and how to be a legend at it. I highly recommend checking this out. This blog is kind of detailed. I don't know if this is where I would start, but if you're using React Query, which you should be for client-side fetching, then this would be a great place to start. Next, I just have a little example of using the AI SDK from Vercel and like implementing these tools, which I think is really cool. Get expenses, get runway, etc. I haven't experimented with this too much, but I am going to start doing this for one of my apps, which has a chat assistant. I assume that all of these functions returns a function that actually gets run when like get invoices, for example, needs to be called. But this is a really cool layout and, very simple to stream text back. Next, just a hiring announcement from Upstash. They're hiring a TypeScript engineer. I looked at their hiring page too. They're also hiring an SRE and I think just a normal software engineer. So if you're interested in working for them, they definitely seem like a startup that's going to continue to grow. So it could be good ROI on your shares. And then here we just have Theo with a little benchmark talking about Gemini 2.5 Flash specifically, which you can see, which is like the fifth one from the left, and it's doing better than DeepSeek. So that's really cool. Obviously, DeepSeek is open source, whereas Gemini is not. And it's the reasoning model as well, which I'm not sure if there's a non-reasoning 2.5 Flash, but it doesn't seem like there is. It's cool to stay up to date. I still love Gemini Flash because it's so cheap. I believe I'm still using 2.0 Flash, so I might have to look into upgrading, but the competition is fierce, and like this infrastructure of AI is looking really good, as opposed to like when you look at the monopolies of like Apple and Android, etc., where that was the only way you could have access to those platforms. Now you kind of have like these AIs, open source, open weights, etc. The future's looking bright potentially, as long as OpenAI doesn't take control and be the first one to AGI, honestly. Next, we have Guillermo announcing that Microfrontends for Vercel is coming soon. I'm not sure what this is going to look like. This is just a sneak peek. I don't even know if Microfrontends really makes sense for early startups, but if you're in a later stage startup and you have a lot of teams working on different front ends and the projects are huge, then it makes sense. And if you're deploying on Vercel, it could be a really cool addition. And as well, Vercel just announced that Probe accounts can skip the build queue, which is cool. It'll make things run faster, and apparently 50% lower price for build compute, so that's always cool. They're talking about how they have a new Firecracker based compute platform, which is really interesting. I believe that's the same software that's used by AWS Lambda to essentially spin up these like quote unquote micro VMs. It's really like deep infrastructure stuff, but it's really cool. And the competitive edge is still there for Vercel, even though the VPS side is also kind of making some moves. And like you theoretically could run Firecracker on your own potentially. And then next we just have a quick example of AI SDK with this company called Rev, where you can do audio transcription really quickly. AI SDK is definitely the quickest one. It's still, I guess, under experimental transcribe, so I don't know how quick we want to be using this, but cool that they always post these examples. I love keeping up to date with this account. And lastly, for today, we have Emil Kowalski, who's a designer at Linear. Just made a quick blog post about good versus great animations. He talks about like just having better animations. He says that software, we are kind of at this point where like anyone can build like a trash app and deploy it, but nice animations, good UX, good user-oriented workflows is really what makes the game changer. So animations can be a part of that. That's all for today. Pretty quick video. Not that much news this week. Hopefully more will come out this week. And if anything new comes out, I'll keep you up to date. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.